Hello. I thought I would give you a brief introduction to our module, Work, Employment and Globalisation, before we meet next Friday. I want you to consider the three terms in the module title, Work, Employment, Globalisation, as relational. I will refer to relational approaches as we go through our sessions next week and the week after. Work and employment are clearly linked together, but they are not the same thing. Somebody may be employed, they are working for an employer, but they may well do all sorts of other forms of work in the community, in the home as well. Somebody who is unemployed has not ceased to work. There is plenty of work that they have to do. And there are many forms of informal economy where people work with and for each other. So there are relations between work and employment. These in themselves relate to the experience of globalization. In this module, I'm going to concentrate particularly on globalization as it's been understood over the last 35-40 years. It is a contested term. There is no one single approach, although I want you to explore particularly the work of David Held and his colleagues in their book, Global Transformations. I want to emphasize at this point the importance of using theory, not just in your thinking and in your search for explanations, but also in your answers to the two assessment questions. The questions ask you for comparisons between countries. And there might be a risk that we just simply write down, this is what this one has, and this is what that one has. I'm afraid that will not pass. We have to look for explanations. Why are there differences? Why are there similarities? What are the underlying processes that lead to whatever it is that we actually see? And simply saying this is due to globalization, again, is not enough. What aspect of globalization? So we will concentrate not just on the what, but far more detail on the how. How have things changed? And where? Where have things changed? There have been significant changes in different parts of the world, particularly over the last 30 or 40 years. Do they relate to each other? I will argue, following the work of William Robinson, that yes, they do. As we have moved to a transnational global economy, so there are changes in one area affect life in another area of the world. We also need to look at the why questions and the when and the where. So not so much what, but how, why, where, and when. What are the theories that we're going to draw? Well, we certainly can't cover in one module all the relevant theories. We have to make selections. And my approach is to give you a broad view of 4 or 5 theories and then to concentrate in a little bit more detail on 2 or 3. So the broad theories that I will refer to are neoliberal economics, the transformational approach of David Held and his colleagues, which is rather different from the neoliberal approach, and the Marxist approach of David Harvey. I will also refer briefly to the work of Manuel Castells. They provide the broad framework. The theorists that I will say more about include Gary Gireffi for his work on commodity value chains, Saskia Sassen for her work on cities, and William Robinson for his work on transnational globalization. So Gireffi gives us the notion of commodity value chains And he is not suggesting that these are new, that these are simply associated with globalization. Yes, they have changed as an impact of globalization have occurred, and we need to understand and explore clearly what we actually mean by globalization. But Gireffi and his colleagues showed that, say, 500-600 years ago, there were perfectly effective commodity chains, and they were adding value, and they required exactly the same issues, for instance, of storage and marketing, as we will find with any modern company. Of course, they have become different. It is the notion of a value chain that I will particularly concentrate on. How something starts as a raw product in one part of the world with cheap labour and can acquire value, perhaps a niche high market value, when it is completed in another part of the world, while other commodities are mass produced. How does that work? So Gireffi gives us this notion of commodity value chains, so that you can see different countries are located in different ways and actually contribute in different ways to these commodity value chains. Some lose out, some gain. Behind that, there's a question about inequality. And if there's one word which will sum up this module, it is about the study of inequalities. Inequalities of gender, inequalities of income, inequalities of work. Our next theorist is Saskia Sassen, and from her I'm going to look particularly at her study of cities in the world economy, and I'm going to look at cities, because when you are comparing countries, we need to look at cities, how they have changed, how people live in them, who's living in them, who's moving to them, who's moving out of them. Do we have failed cities? I will refer to one study, not Sassen's, on Detroit, which can be seen as, in some ways, a city in decline, although Benelli, whose work I will refer to, certainly sees it differently from that. So Sassen will help us with where, when, and why questions, just as Gireffi gives us some what answers, but he also particularly gives us how answers. The next theorist is William Robinson. From Robinson, I'm going to pick particularly the notion of the transnational economy, how regional economies have become part of a global transnational economy, which is central to the development and to the challenge, for that matter, of capitalism. So Robinson gives us that big background view. Finally, for this, a brief mention of Manuel Castells. It's Castells' work on communications and communications technology and its impact on us in cities that I want to take. It's easy to see communications technologies, the use of whether it's mobile phones, computers, or far more sophisticated instruments, as taking place everywhere. Well, of course, financial transactions couldn't occur without them, and it has had an impact on the rise and development of financial capital, which itself has taken over considerably from trade capital. If we consider the amount that is risen, that is spent each year on volumes of trade capital and compare it with finance capital, there is a considerable difference between the two. But what Castells points us to are communication-rich environments and communication-less-rich environments. But that doesn't mean that there are environments which are devoid of communications. I will look briefly at the work of activists who have used communications, particularly the Slum Dwellers International group, but also the political groups in the Arab Spring. I hope that gives you a flavour of what this module is going to be about, and I look forward to seeing you next week.